Feeling trapped by outdated cancer treatments? You're not alone. Welcome to Off-ScriptRX, where we break free from the limits of conventional medicine and open the door to revolutionary repurposed medications. I'm Dr. Nathan Goodyear, and this podcast is about disrupting the cancer care status quo. It's time to reclaim your health with treatments they don't want you to know about. If you're ready for a future of real possibilities, you're in the right place. Rethink repurposed medications. Rethink reality. Welcome to another Off-ScriptRX podcast where we're diving deep into the background of repurposed medications and really talk about their bold future possibilities. And it's really interesting when you look at this drug, hydroxychloroquine. It is a repurposed drug that's being rewritten in our prescription vocabulary, if you will. It's an old drug with bold new possibilities. And of course, talking about drugs, I have to bring back my favorite drug dealer and drug user, my pharmacy and good friend, Dr. Joe Nowell.
Thanks for the intro.
Joe, welcome. Hey, you were the one that said it all these times.
That's right. I love drugs. So
you love dispensing. You don't do drugs in the pharmacy. Well, maybe kind of. I don't know.
Depends on the day. No. We do drugs all the time.
Yeah, and I noticed we actually have our first guest in the audience there behind you.
Yes. He,
Mr. Skelly. He looks like he lost his skin.
Yeah, he's an unfortunate, victim of big pharma.
Yeah, so. he needs to get thicker skin, right?
That's right.
Well, we talked recently about ivermectin. We were talking about this before we came on, and how, well, why don't you say it, Joe? Because you compared ivermectin, its use pre-pandemic, and then hydroxychloroquine pre-pandemic. And I think what you were saying there was very relevant, because what we have, if you just simply Google hydroxychloroquine, it is massively affected by recency bias. I mean, Google, it's all pandemic stuff. But give some highlights about your experience with those two drugs pre-pandemic.
Okay, yeah. The like we were talking last week, in regards to ivermectin, and our experience with the dispensing of both of those drugs was night and day. Prior to the pandemic, we dispensed hydroxychloroquine on a regular basis. Several times a week, if not several times a day, because we had a lot of patients on it that had, autoimmune diseases such as lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, or people that were getting ready to travel to third world countries as a standard, pre-trip treatment. And so that was pretty common for us. It was otherwise known for many years as Plaquenil, the brand name. Then went generic, and so hydroxychloroquine became sort of the buzzword that we were using, and the main thing that we dispensed for long periods of time. And compared to ivermectin, I might dispense that twice a year. Just not that many parasitic infections, or at least around here, just not that many prescriptions demanding it. And even if we did back then, the dose for ivermectin was quite low. Based on a 0.2 mg per kg calculation on ivermectin for a human, average sized person might get 12 milligrams once, and then maybe a repeat dose 30 days later for a standard infection of parasites.
So you're talking about parasitic infection there, not treatment for off-label uses.
Yeah, when this is pre-COVID, so we weren't using it necessarily for anything else, other than the fact that it was being shipped across the world for, river blindness and things of that nature that had been used for 40 years. But as far as our experience in dispensing, hydroxychloroquine, is hands down the more popular medication, but it being used for something totally different. Then COVID comes, and then the discussion of hydroxychloroquine popped up. Relatively quickly, it came up as a popular thing, and it was used for a period of time, and then fairly rapidly dismissed by the World Health Organization as ineffective. I think around 2021, if I remember correctly on the date, in use for COVID, even though we had seen success. And of course, they did something similar with ivermectin shortly after that as well. But
You
those
know, you
are,
bring,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, you bring up an interesting point there, Joe, in that you talked about hydroxychloroquine, which, by the way, it's a derivative of chloroquine, right? And chloroquine has more adverse side effects, and so hydroxychloroquine, that hydroxyl group added, reduces its side effects compared to the chloroquine. And
Yeah. Yeah,
and,
both
and
are used, but the hydroxy group is less side effect, more potentiation of the effect. So they
prescribe. Are you filling scripts right now with hydroxychloroquine? I mean, to this week?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still out there. I mean, it's still used. I still have patients with rheumatoid arthritis. I still have patients with, you know, autoimmune diseases with their used on a regular basis. And from time to time, we do have prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine for COVID patients. So it still does come through. It does require prescription, and so we still have to go through the standard process. Whereas when we deal with ivermectin in the state of Tennessee, we have a collaborative practice law that allows us to dispense it via a collaborative practice agreement, so you don't have to go to a doctor and get a prescription. We have the authority to do that at the pharmacy, but that doesn't exist for hydroxychloroquine. And I do get that question quite often, and it's like, nope, need a real prescription for hydroxychloroquine because it does have side effect profile with it, and it's rare. I mean, I think I've heard stats anywhere from 1% to 10% of cardiovascular electrical signals on the cardiac, creating sort
Yeah.
of potentiation issues. But that's a really low percentage. And when I talk to my buddies, like the doctors from India, they go over there, once a year or to visit family. And I was talking to one of them one day and asked him about the concerns. And this was early in COVID when we were trying to figure out how to use it. And he says, I've taken it 1,000 times. Really? And he goes, oh yeah, every time we go home, we have to take it. We dose it on a regular basis. And he goes, no problems. But, those
See that?
cautions are out there just like any medicine. But in reality, the probability is low, and the benefit is great. So I've got no qualms with it, so it's,
That's interesting because as a pharmacist, you're an ally to doctors to make sure that drug to drug interactions, or make sure that a drug is not misappropriate for a patient's diagnosis. So maybe they have an arrhythmia, somehow the doctor missed that because another doctor diagnosed it, didn't get transferred to his medical record. Something, those kind of things can happen, and so
mhm.
pharmacists play a very central role there. So when a pharmacist picks up the phone and calls a doctor and says, "Hey, I just want to let you know about this," it's like, "Oh, wow, did not know that. No, the patient never told me that." So that's happened from time or two. But comparing ivermectin to hydroxychloroquine, I do think definitely there is the more potential for the side effects with hydroxychloroquine over ivermectin. And obviously, the discussion here is about the repurposing of this medication in cancer, obviously, because that's what we're talking mostly here at Prescribed. That is offscriptrx.com. Prescribed is my other podcast, so check that out, please. Pre-scribe.com. But this here, Off-ScriptRX, we're talking all things repurposed medications, and I haven't had enough coffee, so there you go. Another sip of the caffeine. Another sip of the caffeine. Let's get that brain going this morning. But So you talked about them flying over, and you also mentioned earlier prevention, because it's one thing to treat, but you really, in my mind, as a practitioner, and tell me from a pharmacist if this rings true, if you're focusing on prevention, not treatment, prevention, I would think that the safety profile there is pretty big to just say, well, there's no active infection, but hey, we want to prevent a potential exposure and infection. So we're going to put you on something as purely preventative. That seems to me to have indicate its safety profile is quite large.
It is. I mean, you take that into consideration with the amount of time we've used it for many years, and go back to one of its derivatives, which is quinine. You remember the use of quinine for leg cramping, and the FDA finally took that off the market. They took it off the market and said it didn't work, and you couldn't convince me, because all my patients came in and said, "Where is it? I've got to have it. My legs are cramping." And with the amount of response we got from
That's a mass psychosis, Joe. It's a mass psychosis.
okay, gotcha. That was it. Yeah, it was a swamp gas, right? The the is so it's interesting that we've used, and we still do, in quinine water. Was it tonic water? I think it is, and that's the only way you can get it now. But they took it off, and their argument was arrhythmias. That potential issue. And these are things that, just like anything, we have to be very careful. But we have to take that kind of caution and extrapolate it all the way into herbal, supplements. You can drink too much water and hurt yourself, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
too much
You can kill
oxygen. Yeah. So there's limits to everything, and that's what we're here for. Which is like, how do we use these medicines, maximize their effect, fix the disease or prevent the disease, and then how do we get off of it as soon as possible? Because in my opinion, maintenance medication is generally a rare thing, or should be a rare thing. Where this idea we have to take medicine forever doesn't quite fit with our biochemistry. It's you get sick, use your medicine, get fixed, quit using your medicine. Should be the main goal, I think, from any pharmacy or any physician, with the goal of the patient in mind. But I digress. I went from quinine, to hydroxy, or not the hydroxy, but quinine to chloroquine to hydroxychloroquine, and that's where we are now. So,
No, I think that's relevant because quinine is where it basically kind of came from, and it's from that what is that name of that tree? It's from the cinchona tree, cinchona tree, which is native to the Andean region of South America. Not to say I even know what that looks like, but that's the tree where it originated. And it's so funny how so many of these drugs, they go back to nature and go back to trees and go back to bark and go back to flowers. We kind of have this ongoing nature to medicine pipeline that seems like we need to go back more to nature to get better results.
well, it's interesting too that it comes from the same region where malaria is prevalent, and of course that was one of the original ideas, was to use this to prevent malaria.
Yeah, I found it interesting that I was trying to go back. I always like to go, get my geek on and go back to, okay, when's the first reports of this in, maybe not recent literature, but, predating our modern times. And the first time I could see that it really became big was in the Jesuits in the 17th century. Basically advocating for the cinchona tree as a treatment for malaria. I found that to be pretty interesting. It goes
Yeah,
way back, way back.
it's been around, and
Yeah.
that's it's amazing too. It's exciting from a drug standpoint to run into something that works and you didn't know about say, when you were in school, and we run into this all the time. We didn't know how wonderful CBD was, until recently, and how wonderful ivermectin was until recently, and how effective hydroxychloroquine is until recently. So and that's just a few. I mean, there's so many things that we take for granted, such as IV vitamin C, which you've touted on before. Who knew, right? I mean, Linus Pauling was onto something, but
Oh, yeah.
and then
Yeah,
the studies that he would, huh?
somebody brought something up to me about Linus Pauling that I didn't notice about, was that he's one of only two people, I think, that have won the Nobel Prize for medicine solo. I didn't know that.
I didn't.
But
I didn't realize. I knew that he had gotten the Nobel Prize, but I didn't realize. I'd never looked at it from that standpoint. But
as in for many years it's a combination, but there it was solo. But yeah, but you're right. We when we use a product and we start to observe the product, we start to understand its uses broader.
yeah, yeah, and I believe his Nobel Prize was for the IV vitamin C, wasn't it? Or vitamin
Where
C in
was
use?
Yeah, it was for vitamin C. Yeah, it was for vitamin
Yeah.
C.
Isn't it ironic? We've got Nobel Prize winners for the use of ivermectin, or the discovery of ivermectin, and we've got Nobel Prize winners for the use of IV vitamin C, but they uh, they downplay those uses. I mean, the last thing big pharma wants is an affordable, accessible, effective, non-patentable medication.
Yeah. Vitamin C, you talked about ivermectin, add artesunate to that mix. And I always find that that's what's interesting. Ivermectin and artesunate being kind of that same exact year, same exact year. So they actually shared the Nobel Prize that year. It's really interesting when you look back at hydroxychloroquine. It was FDA approved in 1955, and poor soldiers. They're always the petri dishes of experimentation. But it really hydroxychloroquine really took off, and chloroquine took off in the industrial production line during World War II, particularly in the South Pacific. But there was actually a publication in 1953 that first highlighted the benefit potentially in lupus and rheumatoid arthritis patients, but here again in US soldiers. So, I mean, this goes back, I mean, we're looking at what, 75 years basically
Mhm.
of use as an FDA approved product of either chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine. So, I mean, that's a great time period and I'd be interested to hear from you as a pharmacist, from a time period, where does that compare to other drugs that are maybe well known in people's minds? Is that short? Is that long?
Oh,
75
well,
years.
that's 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 a good run, 75 years. I mean, but we have lots of medicines that work great, and they're forgotten about because they're old. And we have this, like iodine. It's one of my favorites.
Hmm.
Iodine has some wonderful properties. Been around for a long, long time. Anti-cancer, antiviral, antibacterial, anti-fungal, and mucolytic. It has all the properties you want in a medicine, except it just tastes terrible. But
Well, Joe, you're a compounding pharmacist. Can't you take care of that? Come on now.
some things can't be done. But no, no, there's a company that makes the nasal spray that doesn't taste like it should. When I first used it, I thought, oh, this is going to be terrible, and it was actually nice. But the Cofix spray, Cofix, when they
Yeah, but
came
that's
out with their
nasal, so you shouldn't be spraying
nasal,
that in your
yeah,
mouth.
and it's also clear. But the brown stuff, the stuff that stains the skin, the traditional iodide mix, that's the old. You learn a lot from your patients, and my old patients would come in, older patients, seasoned patients, would come in and they'd say, "Well, a long time ago, this old doctor fixed my sore throat." And I'm like, "Well, how'd they do it?" And they said they get the long Q-tip, with the wooden one, and they would take iodine and they would mix it with like glycerin and rose water or something along those lines, make it a little sticky, and then they would coat the back of their throat with it, and bang, no sore throat. And so I mean, this one, well, I remember this about 20 years ago. She was telling me the story, and she wanted it because she was worried about her youngins or something like that. And so we did some research and found out, I think she brought it in from something she had it written down, and we made it, and she did it, and my gosh, it works just like she said it did. Iodine is one of those things where if you ask a doc, and I'm not knocking docs, we're the same way. We're taught, I graduated in what, 95, if I remember correctly. and and so you get that 4 years, start in 91, go to 95. So you learn all that stuff right in that period of time, at least I did. And you got 4 years to cram that stuff in your head, and they're not going to go way back. And so you talk to a lot of practitioners, and like, no, never thought about iodine. That's just old. Well, just because it's old doesn't mean it doesn't work. You know, Again, it can't be patented, so it's not going to be promoted for sale because you can't make any money from a big pharma standpoint on products that are readily out there and available over the counter.
And it
But
really that
anyway,
really
I
gets me.
digress. But it,
No,
it
no, that's
is an
good.
amazing, as an example, we're talking about the age of medications and the effective rate. And I think what's interesting about it is that, they're old and we might use them for something. But what's fascinating to me is in the past 5 or 10 years, what we're learning about these things, this is new to us. They're new uses, and that to me is exciting.
I think no, no, I think that's a good point because, it's human nature, right, to turn to the brand new shiny toy.
Sure.
And so when you look at it from that perspective, it makes sense that the brand new shiny drug, which by the way, that serves profits for the pharmaceutical industry, you know, it makes double sense for them. But for us, we want that new drug because we think that new drug is going to bring something special. When in actuality, an older drug may be bringing the same thing, but the reason why you're not turning to the older drug is because it's off patent. Is
Yeah,
that
it's
in
just not on top of mind,
yeah.
And the thing is we just at some point you have to use it. You've got to play with it. You've got to prescribe it to your patients, see it work to know it, or at least read about it and go, I think these things are great. I mean, when Merrick came up with the IV vitamin C protocol for sepsis, that was groundbreaking. Because we have no FDA approved drug for sepsis. And then all of a sudden, if you take IV vitamin C, by gosh, survival rate went from 50% to 99%, on
And that was,
something as old as vitamin C.
and of course, again, we've talked about that before, but timing is so critical there as it is with so many things. But, it's really interesting because when you look at, there was a study in 2013 looking at hydroxychloroquine. And what they did is they just basically said, let me look at all the studies that are out there on hydroxychloroquine. And of course, they found the malaria, but of course, here in the United States, we don't really have a big problem with malaria.
I don't know
So
about
it's
you.
not really.
No.
That's right. Oh, East Tennessee has a problem with
Oh, yeah,
malaria.
yeah. No.
TVA is up to something, is what you're saying, huh?
We are technically a rainforest here, but
What?
it's
In
yeah, the
Lenore
Smoky
County?
Mountains, Appalachia, yeah, it's
Oh,
rainforest.
okay. So you got some
But
Amazonians up there?
yeah, just saying. But no malaria problem, but not yet
But
anyway.
yeah, and so then obviously the autoimmune disease about the same time. But it's really interesting because the effect of what it's doing in the autoimmune disease is probably why we see the effect, and in part maybe as an antiviral in type 2 diabetes. So in 2013, this kind of review of all the literature suggested, hey, it might be helpful in diabetes and viral, and that's pre-pandemic. So it's not being influenced by the bias of that. But it's really interesting because they did emergency approve it in early in March 2020, but they disapproved it in June of 2020. Was it June or July?
Was it 20 or
Can't
21?
remember.
I thought it was 21.
Oh no, it was 20, I thought,
Was it
because
early?
they said yeah, it was very quickly, but because they said a large randomized trial. Um, showed that it wasn't effective. And I was like, wow, large randomized trial in 2 months? What? I mean, how can you do a study, recruit people,
Yeah,
do the statistical analysis, and then publish that in 2 months? It's like, wow, that's quite the speedy there. But the
yeah.
other thing that's really interesting about hydroxychloroquine is it's actually listed as one of the World Health Organization list of essential medicines. Just not during the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at one of these articles here, October 20, 2023. Um, they published something and it was talking about a study mixed with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin reduced mortality rates by 35% in COVID.
Whoa,
So
because
now,
that's a reason why they said the arrhythmia issue was the combination of those two together, and that was the safety issue that they were really concerned about. But what you're saying something different. It was reducing mortality.
of course, but that's one thing. But you know,
Can you send me that, Joe? Send me that study because we'll include that in the show notes as we include all the studies and references supporting what we're talking about,
yeah,
except for
sure, I'll
skeleton,
get that to you.
except for Skelly and his lack of thick skin.
Okay, got it. We'll do that. I'll get that to you. Uh, so
But
let's let's
when you look at the cancer kind of connection, I think it ties into a lot of the autoimmune effects because what's happening in autoimmunity is obviously the immune system is attacking things it shouldn't attack, kidneys, skin, connective tissue, these kind of things. And so what it's doing is it's actually reducing what's called toll-like receptor activation. These are preserved pattern recognition receptors that our body has for basically infectious diseases for the most part or pathogens. And what hydroxychloroquine is doing in autoimmune disease is it's down regulating that, which is affecting the immune system, and so it's calming the immune system down. And really that's interesting because that toll-like receptor activation is one of the things that cancer can use. And so there's one of the connections between the autoimmune effect and the cancer effect, but it's through the immune system. So one of the things that hydroxychloroquine is doing, Joe, is it's modulating the immune system. And that's pretty interesting when you think about it, that it's not a anti-malarial drug, it's actually an immunotherapy. It's just not an immune checkpoint inhibitor.
yeah, yeah. I because I getting ready for the show, I was looking at the back, going back and looking at the mechanisms of action and seeing how much do we know about this? Yeah, I mean, we should know quite a bit, since we've had it for quite a while. And I found this nice chart here. We're talking about the three major components, which is antiviral, anti-inflammatory, and then the immune modulation effect, and its effect on IL-1 and IL-6. You know, so that's
Now
uh,
you're talking to sweet sauce. I mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
where I
yeah.
like.
This is where I throw it back at you. And interestingly enough, the anti-inflammatory is really interesting because of its effect on decreasing the cytokine production, and then again, its also effect on IL-1, IL-6, and then the TNF alpha effect, which is very similar to the ivermectin effect that we use in the anti-inflammatory component, and of
Yeah,
course
let me touch on.
inhibiting viral replication.
Yeah, yeah. Let's touch on the IL-1 beta and IL-6 because that's really important. So this is, the immune system is a complex system, and it's actually quite beautiful. And so people think about one thing I think that, and you probably encountered this, Joe, is people think about immunotherapy, they're thinking more in the modern context. So they, and this is one of the things that the pharmaceutical industry did is they kind of hijacked the word that immunotherapy is just related to immune checkpoint inhibitors, which these are things like Keytruda, Opdivo, Yervoy. I get tickled when I watch the advertisements right in between football games where the people are running down the beach with the nets, catching butterflies, and there's that person in the background talking about how their left leg's going to fall off because of this drug, right? Your head will
Right.
explode, but it may just help you.
Yeah. Ask your doctor, see if this is right for you.
That's
You
right.
know.
Well, what happens if my head explodes? How can I ask my doctor? Well, I don't know about that one, but just
Yeah.
look at those
Listen
pretty
carefully. This
butterflies.
affects 75% of the population. It, you know.
But so in the anything that affects the immune system, and I say this all the time. I was actually talking with a good friend of mine yesterday, Nation Winters, and so check that out. I'm gonna be on her podcast, so check that out. But anything that impacts the immune system, anything that influences the immune system, it is an immunotherapy. So it's not just confined to conventional definitions, it's anything we do. So here, hydroxychloroquine is decreasing IL-1 beta and IL-6. Now, what's the connection? Let's connect it to COVID and then let's connect it to cancer. Well, when you look at COVID, what we had a initial viral insult. But then what we had in some individuals that had pretty much the platform or some of the foundation of those comorbidities, right? And what happened is an inflammatory response went berserko, nutso. And that was the cytokine storm. Now,
Mm.
cytokines are the immune signal, okay, that are a part of the immune system. But here, it's basically instead of just, hey, immune cells go over here and do this, hey, you immune cell go over and do this, it basically breaks out a big, megaphone and just starts yelling. And so, what was creating so much of that collateral damage, particularly to the lungs, and then coupling that with the intubation that then really led to a lot of deaths, was the IL-6, interleukin 6. And so, it's this signal that we need. But in the COVID infection, in the high comorbidity individuals, the IL-6 went nutso. And that actually happens in cancer too. So when we're working within the immune system, so I work with Williams Cancer Institute. When we work with the immune system there, one of the things we follow very closely, and interestingly enough, Joe, nobody follows the cytokines. You can actually follow the cytokines. What you're seeing is how the immune cells are communicating to themselves. And so we follow very intently IL-1 beta and IL-6. And we follow others, TGF beta, IL-10, et cetera. But those are that triad of IL-1 beta, IL-6, and TGF beta are very critical because if they all spike, that propagates the spread of the cancer. But it's the immune system that's doing it, but it's the cancer that's manipulating it. So we actually use different repurposed drugs there, Joe, which is different because hydroxychloroquine's working in IL-1 beta and IL-6. There's an injection for IL-1 beta, Kineret, approved for rheumatoid arthritis. We use that to downregulate it if we need to. And then Actimra, which is for IL-6. But here, hydroxychloroquine, it might be used as a preventative strategy there to prevent that. So let me tie that to modern day conventional treatment strategies, what I call the unholy trinity of surgery, chemo, radiation. One of the ways, and there's many ways, one of the ways that chemotherapy in a full dose can actually spread the cancer is through an upregulation of that IL-6. Again, cytokine storm. So hydroxychloroquine can actually be used as a preventative strategy there, but also be used to increase the sensitivity of the chemotherapy. So it's kind of a win-win for the patient in that you're able to lower the dose of the chemo, hopefully reduce the cytokine storm and reduce the IL-6, but also proactively prevent it with the use of the hydroxychloroquine together. But it's tying into the autoimmune disease effect, but here it's in cancer. So that's a great point, Joe. That's a great point.
Yeah, I was kind of flipping around, and I had found this study. It was May of 2018, and it was talking about using hydroxychloroquine in cancer. Again, this is before the benefits from COVID that we saw, but here it says recently, I guess back in 2018 or so, it's been demonstrated the anti-cancer effects of fitting in inhibition of autophagy pathways in cancer types such as breast cancer, glioblastoma, lung cancer, multiple myeloma, pancreatic cancer, melanoma, hepatocellular carcinoma, and bladder cancer. And it goes on to talk about all the differences and very interesting stuff. Um, and that's where I think it's fascinating to listen to you guys, because you guys are having an opportunity to use these things because these are not to my knowledge, FDA approved for this. I mean, we have FDA approval for other things, and this is where we get back into this whole repurposed medication. We're taking an FDA approved medication for one thing, and then, hey, look, it has an effect. Again, in the same method of following this immune modulation therapy, it's going to have an effect on cancers. Just because of exactly what we're learning now. It's like, why not?
Yeah,
Let's
but
suppress this.
look at how we're doing it, Joe. But
I
look at
think
how
it's
we're doing
fascinating.
it. Okay, we're working together, pharmacist, doctor, doctor, pharmacist, doctor, and we're finding a pattern, right? And we're saying, okay, there's a pattern here, or we're collecting dots, and then we start to say, well, here's how we, solve this pattern problem. We connect the dots to find a solution for that which exists and is available to us, which is exactly what happened early in the pandemic, right? We didn't have any approved drugs. And people are going, hey, let's collect the dots. Okay, we have a viral infection. We have an inflammatory problem. Okay, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? We got to reduce the immune system. We got to calm it down a little bit. We got to have something that's antiviral. So this is where doctors were using their creative minds in conjunction with pharmacists. I'm sure there was a lot of collaboration that was ongoing early. But then what
Well,
happened is they came in and said, no, 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 no. You're not about free thinkers. You're not about group critical thinkers. You're about group thinkers and following protocol. So here's what you're going to do. And so it was really, there was a hard pivot point. And I call it
and it's
Fauciism,
it's
right?
it's still in play, and this is what's so sad about the situation. The politics involved, which there really shouldn't be any. Doctors and pharmacists should be making those decisions for their patients, irregardless of politics. But back in, and I may have mentioned this last time, I can't remember, but here in Tennessee, just up the road here, about 20 miles, is Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They have the second fastest computer in the world. And back when all this was hitting the fan, no one knew what to do. And so they took all the known data and they shoved it into that computer. And it took about 4 days, and that thing spit out an answer. And they published it, and you can look it up online, July of 2020. There was an article written, and basically it was the data collected from the supercomputer. And it came back and it said that it says, this is what I think. I guess they took all the data, DNA stuff, and said, it thinks COVID is X. And it talked about cytokines and bradykinin and all kinds of things and then it gave a whole list of medications that it thought it was, effective against. And so it's kind of interesting that about the same time, the World Health Organization is downplaying the use of hydroxychloroquine, among other things, in the use of COVID, whereas we've got data picking up and saying maybe we need to take a hard look at cytokine and bradykinin and look at these systems, because everything that all the data we're giving it says that this is what's happening. And there's another chunk of data too when we talk about how in talking about COVID, how COVID gets into the body and starts putting in ACE2 receptors all throughout the body in places where ACE2 receptors don't belong, and then reveals itself, so many days later, and then attacks the ACE2s. That there is I was reading some mechanism of action earlier about hydroxychloroquine's effect on the ACE2 receptors. So I thought that was an interesting correlation between its effect and how it can downplay its viral activity, which
Yeah, the ACE2 receptors, angiotensin converting enzyme type 2, usually that's in the lungs, pulmonary system. But that's a receptor that the virus would use for entry into the cell. So that's a great point, Joe.
yeah, it was
But it's
preventing that, catching it on both ends.
I always I tend to be an optimist. I always try to look at the cup half full, not half empty. I think if you go through life looking at the cup half empty, that's a kind of a miserable existence. And so I choose to find the good in most things where I can, of course. You mentioned politics. Hard to find a lot of good in that. It's a four-letter word that's not the four-letter word. And you're exactly right, Joe, that when you look at a patient, the people making the decision for the patient should be the team of doctor, practitioner, and pharmacist. That should be who's making the decision. It should not be some bureaucrat, pencil pusher. I could say a lot of other things that's remote in a far distant land, might we say the capital, making a decision that affects and impacts the ability of a doctor or pharmacist to collaborate and work together to take care of a patient. I don't know. That's just me. I haven't had enough coffee, maybe. I don't know. But,
Yeah,
it
I don't
would
think
be
you're
like,
too far.
my wife and I are fixing to hop on a plane going out to the Beverly Hills office today. It would be like me walking onto the airplane and tell the captain, hey, you know, go ahead and get into first class. I got this. I got this. Guess what? They're going to escort my butt off that plane. But that's exactly what the politicians do. They walk on the plane, they walk into the office or the pharmacy and they go, "Excuse me, I am politician ABC or XYZ or, SHI whatever, and I'm going to fly this plane." It's like, "Oh, really? What criteria do you have?" "Oh, I don't, other than I'm a politician." Okay, whatever. So that
Yeah.
that that you bring up a very good point. And but I look at the pandemic. So again, through that cup half full, I think there's a lot of opportunity that is being positive coming out of that. So look at
Oh, yeah,
hydroxychloroquine
absolutely.
and look at ivermectin, and now it's in the public consciousness. A repurposed medication. A lot of pushback, by the way. Interestingly enough, on one of the social media platforms, we posted a social media reel, which we reposted yesterday, but it had been up for like 6, 7 weeks on hydroxychloroquine. And amazingly, the social media platform lost the audio. The video was still there, but they lost the audio. And that's what it said, audio lost, audio lost. No, audio wasn't lost. They deleted it. It's called shadow banning. We just reposted it. But
That's
so
ridiculous.
when it's absurd, but it's censorship. It's censorship. It's political censorship. Um,
Yeah, isn't that illegal?
well,
You
but see
can't
the
define free speech,
oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that's the platforms being used by the political establishment to tell us what to listen to and what to hear. But I wanted to touch on one more thing before we get out of here, because I know you got to open your pharmacy here soon. Is that this is not just something where we're like, hey, it can reduce the inflammation. We're moving into an arena of cancer where it's the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. So much more targeted and specific in what we're after with our treatment. And so looking at pancreatic cancer, hydroxychloroquine has actually been shown to target one of the key mutations that are found in about 35% of pancreatic cancers, what's called the KRAS G12D mutation. Very common, and it points to the aggressiveness of that tumor. And hydroxychloroquine targets that. So this is not something that we're just saying, okay, you have a virus, boom, take this. Hey, you have an autoimmune disease like lupus or Sjogren's or rheumatoid arthritis, boom, take this. Or you have cancer. Research is actually really showing, and this is where the positive nature, I think, of the pandemic has brought out. It's forced us to focus on the details. Is, hey, hydroxychloroquine not only can help cancer, but wow, it can very much target specific cancers and specific genomic mutations of the cancer. That's the specificity of a
Yeah,
repurposed medication,
yeah.
hydroxychloroquine.
Well, taking it back to what you said, I mean, people all will say that the pandemic was a bad thing, and we would all agree, and many, many deaths that probably should not have occurred. But on the positive note, on that glass half full kind of thing, it has pushed us to use medicines in ways we've never used medicines before, and that's progress. even though the people that are doing it are being ridiculed and treated like redheaded stepchildren, we're learning and moving forward.
Or gray,
So it's a good
gray
thing.
bearded stepchildren. Gray bearded stepchildren. That's what we are.
That's right.
Well, Joe, so I guess it gives you the opportunity to just do more drugs.
Just have fun doing it every
Win-win.
day. I mean, the whole idea is the less drugs you do, the better off you are. But, let's be very specific about what we're doing and get to the end result, which is, using that C word, heaven forbid we cure a patient, right?
And I think that's a brilliant point for us to wrap this up with, is that we'll get a lot of comments where people say, look, I don't want to take drugs. Hey, I get you. I don't either. But understand that when you have cancer, if we can add some repurposed drugs that have a huge, long track record of safety, and then it can help on its own, but it can then help with maybe some of the conventional treatments you may be undergoing and may not. But if you can then reduce the dosing of that drug, say chemotherapy, reduce the side effects of said chemotherapy, now you start to see why this lower cost, readily available drug can be so beneficial, because it can expedite that healing strategy and do so in a safer manner. And that's what we're after, is help more patients, help them quicker, and do so in a way that, the whole concept of cancer treatment is, hey, we're going to destroy your body. On the flip side, when you're quote unquote in remission, then we're going to try to help you recover. And it's like, well, that seems a little backwards, because in a lot of cases it doesn't recover. But here, repurposed medications, and again, this is the key. Those of you listening, those of you watching, you need to find a pharmacist like Joe, because a pharmacist like Joe is going to find doctors that he can work with, that he can collaborate with, that they can put their heads together and find therapies that are going to help you that maybe somebody's forgot about. So Joe, how can people find you? Where can they find you? You mentioned you're in the Amazon.
I'm in a rainforest.
Oh,
Amazon's
okay,
a
sorry.
little bit south, but yeah,
I know.
classified as a rainforest. But yeah, we're here in East Tennessee and
Okay.
just outside Knoxville, so kind of at the gateway to the Smokies. And so on my website, I'm a Fresh Pharmacy, and our website is freshdrugs.com. And our telephone number is 865-988-0000, or as we like to say, 988 ooh. But
That's some
one thing I
is that
wanted to
some East
mention
Tennessee
before we
humor?
go on, one thing I want to mention on hydroxychloroquine and one of its repurposed things is, I was flipping through some of these studies in preparation for this, and I ran across this implication, and you can speak to this because I didn't study on it in great detail, but it implied that the use of hydroxychloroquine was synergistic with the use of cisplatin. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you're using a low dose cisplatin, and then you can modulate the effects of cisplatin with hydroxychloroquine and use less of it and get better outcomes, then that would be down your alley. But I read across something like that, and I thought, well, that was interesting. And
Yeah,
so anytime we
cisplatin,
can
oxaliplatin.
manipulate, yeah, good.
No, 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 no. Go ahead.
I was just saying, anytime we can use these repurposed drugs to get the same outcomes with using less toxicity, because cisplatin is notorious for creating,
Neuropathy.
neuropathy, yeah, and because it gets in there and just destroys the nerve endings, and so if we can get the same activity and mix these things together and use less and still get the same outcome, then that's a good thing in my opinion. But that's in your wheelhouse more so than mine.
Joe, quit being so logical, dude. Come on. I mean, You're trying to help patients. You're trying to provide safer treatments for patients. You're trying to reduce, the toxicity drugs that they're exposed to. I mean, what kind of pharmacist are you, really?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but it is an evolution. I can tell you that I think much differently than I did when I graduated. Um, my opinions on medicines have changed uh, from black to white. Now, however you want to look at it, dark. It totally flipped 180 degrees in a lot of cases. There's certain medicines I absolutely don't like, would never recommend. Um, that we were taught is the best thing on the planet, and I totally disagree. But that's a whole nother lecture. But um, I don't know.
Well,
I
this is
lost
why
where I was going with that.
it's okay. This is why I bring you on the podcast as a regular guest. It's because you provide that insight that I think people need to hear from a pharmacist, because so many people are used to the box pharmacist, right? The cookie cutter pharmacist that
Yeah.
really is not going to do much engagement with them. I mean, they can actually come in your store, right? Of course, see Skelly there in the background,
Hmm.
but then actually talk with you, actually sit down with you and have a conversation with you, which I think it's something that harkens back to probably what pharmacy stores used to be like more in general than what they are today. And this is for me, I think it's refreshing, which makes sense that your name is the Fresh Pharmacy.
Well, yeah, we are trying to take a fresh approach to medicine. That was the idea. um, we used to be called East Tennessee Discount Drugs, and I don't know if there's a such thing as a discount drug anymore. So, we decided to refocus our attention, and that's where the name change came from. And made that brand change in 2019, just right before the pandemic, and um,
Good timing.
which was a good time. I don't know if it's good timing, but just ironic that we changed it, and it changed our approach. Our approach is using supplements and using medicines like repurposed medicines, and really focus on the fact that the patients are better off using less medicine. But if you must use medicine, let's use it in the most effective way possible. And look at this and use the term we use, reverse engineering. Look at the biochemistry and go, okay, something's wrong with you. Is it because you're low on, I don't know, statin medication? Well, no. I mean, just again, we're taken back to this logic idea. Um, it's just we got to think about it. There's always an answer. Now, we don't always know where the answer is, and if we keep looking, we'll eventually find it. And I think that's what's so much fun about medicine is you just somebody out there is thinking. And the question is, if we keep reading and keep engaging and keep our minds open, somebody comes along and tells me, "Oh, chew on this root and your arm will grow back." Really? Oh, okay. Let's find out more about that root. And I, I'm always eager to hear something new. But
Well,
it's just for
I
me.
guess that's
I felt like our pharmacy we needed to create a safe haven for people that wanted to find out what they needed, whether they're don't want to vaccinate their children, that they can feel and come in, and we're not going to browbeat them for it. And if they want to come in and hey, let's talk about using some herbs instead of saying, well, you're a nutcase. It's like, no, these are legitimate questions. People have legitimate concerns, and they're right to be concerned with big food and big pharma's control of everything that we do. You must take this medicine for this disease, and that's the only option you have. Not really the case. There's other options
well.
out there for every.
I think that's why you're a good man. I think that's why you're a good friend, and that's why you're a better pharmacist. Is because I think you engage your patients as who they are: human beings, individuals, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, daughters, etc. And that's something that is refreshing And so again, that's the Fresh Pharmacy in Lenore City. You can find them there Monday through Fridays. What is it, 9 to 6, 9 to 6
9 to
p.m.
6,
Eastern
yeah, Monday
time?
through Friday. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
But
Very
yeah.
good. And this is the Off-ScriptRX podcast. Thank you for joining us. And you can always find us at Off-Script. That's off-scriptrx.com. That's the website. There you'll find our blogs, our podcasts. And I encourage you to please sign up for our podcast and share, like, and subscribe to those that you would think would benefit from this information. And let me tell you what, there's a lot of people that can benefit from a pharmacist like Dr. Joe Nowell. So Joe, thanks again. And until next time, man.
Hey, thank you. And you guys keep up the good work too. You're doing a great job, man. We send people out to you all the time. So keep it
You
going.
need to find a repurposed drug to help Skelly back there. Give him a little life.
Yeah, well, we'll work on that.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later, Joe.
All right. Y'all take care.
Your health deserves more than a one-size-fits-all approach. Subscribe now and share this episode to help others break away from outdated treatments. Visit offscriptrx.com to see how repurposed medications can fit into your personal cancer care strategy. Don't settle. Take action and join the movement to rewrite the future of medicine. Rethink repurposing medications. Rethink reality.